Welcome to the presentation feedback on Summer 2023, Components 1 and 2. This is a pre-recorded pack and is designed for teachers to receive feedback on our Pearson or Edexcel GCE Physical Education specification. This will provide an opportunity for you to gain feedback on the national performance of candidates, to consider the variation of how candidates performed on different questions and explore the possible reasons why, and to address any frequently asked questions and common issues. This event is designed for you to receive feedback on the national performance of candidates in components 1 and 2 from summer 2023, to consider the variation of candidate performance on different questions and possible reasons why, plus to receive guidance and support on the extended answer questions, and to reference both the Part 1 and Part 2 examiners' reports, so Component 1 and Component 2 examiners' reports. Please do read the guidance given on the slide as to some items for further reading. The agenda today includes a welcome and introductions followed by 5 sessions. Session 1 is around the grade boundaries and cumulative percentages for summer 2023 in papers 1 and 2. Session 2 is a deep dive on paper 1, looking at questions and advice. Session 3 is a deep dive on paper 2, looking at questions and advice. And session 4 is guidance and support on the extended answer questions, with session 5 being any further support. There are 2 examination components to A-level PE. Component 1 is the Scientific Principles of Physical Education, or 9P01. This is a 2.5-hour exam comprising 140 marks and worth 40% of the qualification. Component 2 is the Psychological and Social Principles of Physical Education exam, 9P02, which is a 2-hour exam comprising 100 marks and worth 30% of the qualification. Units 9P03 and 9P04 are the practical and performance analysis, and they are not covered in this presentation. During this summer, the grade boundaries were awarded as given on this slide. These were taking into account the Ofqual national requirements to bring the grade boundaries back towards 2019 awarding levels, and it was pleasing to award grades reflecting encouraging candidate performances nationally. Please do look at the slide for the details of those boundaries. The next 2 slides draw focus to the assessment objectives, or AOs, and their importance to candidates. Understanding the AOs and the associated command words is one of the major keys to examination success. There are 3 assessment objectives, or AOs, which determine the quality of the response. AO1 is demonstrating knowledge and understanding of the factors that underpin performance and involvement in physical activity and sport, and is interpreted as knowledge in isolation. AO2 is the application of knowledge and understanding of the factors that underpin performance and involvement in physical activity and sport, interpreted to be the examples and applied explanations that are given. And AO3 is analysing and evaluating the factors that underpin performance and involvement in physical activity and sport. And this is interpreted as the ability to show knowledge and understanding through analysing, evaluating and discussing, linked to AO1 and AO2. And this slide here details the most commonly used command words and the meaning or intention behind them. Candidates should be familiar with these command words, their demands, and the allied assessment objectives. Further detail on the meaning of each command word will be given in future slides. It's worth stressing that in all examination series so far, candidates have lost marks through the incorrect understanding and application of the particular command words. Assessment objectives are driven through these command words. Students are recommended to become familiar with these and the potential marks available for them. Marks have been lost because of not understanding this properly. So, for example, AO1 marks are classify, give, list, name, state, define, identify, and outline. These are all 1-mark questions. AO2 questions are describe, where they can be between 2 and 4 marks. And then some questions combine assessment objectives. So, for example, explain could be AO1 or 2. Assess is AO2 and 3. Examine is AO1 and 3. Justify, AO2 and 4. Summarize, AO1, 2, or 3. And the marks for each of these are as shown on the slide. There are some different command words for the extended responses. So discuss combines AO1 and AO3. and it's 5 AO1 marks and 10 AO3 marks, making a 15-mark extended response. And again, evaluate or analysed combines AO2 for 5 marks and AO3 for 10 marks. And again, this is for a 15-mark essay. The first area of focus is paper 1, the scientific principles of physical education. Paper 1 has 140 marks and they're split equally between section A, applied anatomy and physiology, for 70 marks, and section B, exercise physiology and applied movement analysis, also 70 marks. Candidates tended to tackle the majority of the paper with answers that were lengthy enough to gain credit. Some definitions were well learnt, but some were also quite poor. The topic guides and the Inside Track magazine are recommended to support understanding for both papers, for paper 1 and for paper 2. There were some gaps evident in knowledge which we'll explore more fully question by question. Generally, candidates seem to focus on learning facts, which is assessment objective 1. If greater focus was placed on application of this understanding, that would improve the quality of the levels-based answers, particularly if candidates use examples which best demonstrate something, rather than always using their own sport. It would be useful to help with the analysis for candidates to use connectives in their responses, asking themselves so what, maybe adding so that, because, or therefore to their answer, which would help them to develop more analysis in their responses. In revision, rather than focusing on AO1 facts, they need to practice the application to different contexts. In question 1, these definitions were not well learnt. Candidates will need to ensure all key terms have a definition that could be given in an exam answer. In question 2, full muscle names spelled accurately are needed for a question like this. In this example, abdominals was not precise enough. Bullet points are acceptable in summarised questions, making it quick for the candidate to write and clear for the examiner to mark. Full sentences are preferred with added context. A quick summary of the adaptations was needed here. Structural and functional aspects were better understood this year than in previous years, and this candidate makes 3 points worthy of credit in the mark scheme. This question shows good technique. The key parts are underlined, making it easy to mark and not lose points. The examples are also appropriate for each type of energy, rather than the candidate choosing one activity and trying to apply them all to that. Mechanical was the least well known of the energy types. This is a good, clear description with 4 clear points made. This is clearly well understood and supported with examples. Learning diagrams to be able to label them is also an important skill which is sometimes overlooked. Not all the candidates could name the key elements of the muscle fibre. The summary of what happened in the sarcomere was well written by most candidates. Energy systems can be described with equations or with annotated diagrams, as well as in text. This candidate did a bit of both here to be sure. Summarise means to express the most important ideas about something. So in this case, the most important ideas about the slow component of recovery. This was not well known. The examiner's report gives more detail about candidate understanding of this question. Candidates will have to do 2 types of extended answer, either an 8-mark or a 15-mark question. 8 markers are assessed with AO2 and AO3. Examine AO1 and AO3, or justify AO1 and AO3. This example is an examine question, and this requires 2 parts. This particular answer scores 6 marks at the lower end of the top band. There is some application and some high-level knowledge. This answer has a high-level knowledge, detailed and focused on the specific question that has been asked, and it's a good example. This is an example of a band 4 answer. The definitions are correct and it's well explained with correct examples to support it. To attain the highest levels band, analysis is needed to explain why this is useful to the athlete. This answer doesn't progress to that stage with further analysis. Every exam paper will have some specific definition questions, and these should enable candidates to access more straightforward marks. The definition of power was not well known, and this example didn't score a mark. Candidates must learn their definitions from the topic guides and the specification glossary. Outlining is a brief account of non-linked points. Separating out the points, as in this example, is a good technique to ensure you've made enough points of the marks available, in this case 3 points for 3 marks. Most candidates were able to name the test, but fewer scored maximum marks on the explain element, part 2. Explain requires linked points to be made. In this case, the link is to the performance. Too many candidates repeated the question, saying it could improve the performance, but not with the specifics of how and a linked point. For example, the greater power gives greater height, which allows a greater distance to be jumped. This test was well known and candidates gave good, accurate points in their responses. Fitness testing is well known, but too often answers were vague and not substantiated. Setting it out as 4 distinct points is good technique, but each point needs to be clear. Using a numbered set, as in point 1, point 2, point 3, is useful to clarify responses for examiners. Validity, for example, needs substantiation. This example only scores 1 mark. The points are vague and not specific to the question asked. There's only 1 point made here about pushing the ball down, but nothing about the detail of pressure or application to performance. Units are really important, as marks have been lost in this question because the required units were not written down as part of the response. Showing you're working out will also ensure marks are not lost because the examiner can see what you're doing and your understanding. Don't forget to bring calculators to the exam. Graphs must be plotted accurately. Rulers and pencils are also needed. Too many errors were made in this question by some candidates failing to read the question carefully and plotting different information from the table. For example, instead of speed and time, many used distance. In these explain questions, the context and use of data in the question was important. The specific race strategy in question 3 and systems in 4, and these were not well answered, and this candidate wasn't specific enough to gain any credit. Further detail and examples can be found on this in the examiner's report. This question required the relevant supplements and their application specifically to the power athlete. There's often a context in a question. This example scored 6 marks, just in the top band due to the high level of knowledge, and they've used several examples to support the points being made. This example scored at the top of the middle band, gaining 5 marks. It has the right methods of preparation that the athlete uses, but it doesn't have the critical examination of them to access the top band marks. This response scored in the top band and begins the application in the last paragraph, with the application to the performance providing that extra detailed information of so what. The next 3 slides show an example of a candidate scoring in band 3 at 9 marks. They give tests that are appropriate to the sport. However, it lacks the evaluation of why these tests are more suitable. The analysis and debate is lacking. Please see the principal examiner's report for examples of how this can be achieved. Spend a few moments looking at the content. In levels-based responses, candidates are assessed and put into bands rather than gaining marks for every point that they make. This applies to the 8-mark questions and the 15-mark questions. 15-mark questions can be compare, discuss, evaluate, analyse, or suggest, and then marked against different assessment objectives split over 5 levels. And this is highlighted later in section 2 as well. Compare assesses all 3 assessment objectives equally. Discuss assesses AO1 and 3, and evaluate AO2 and 3, along with analyse, which also assesses AO2 and AO3. The second section of the presentation focuses on component 2, the psychological and social principles of physical education. Paper 2 is worth 100 marks, split equally between section A, skill acquisition and sport psychology, 50 marks, and section B, sport and society, 50 marks. This summer, paper 2 saw grade improvements from 2022. Candidates were well prepared in many cases, and the level of knowledge and understanding was praiseworthy. Please take a few moments to look through these key points. For this question, most candidates had some idea that the performers or learners were involved in the learning process, but many failed to link this to the role of the coach, with the learners working to develop each other's performances, and this answer scored just 2 marks. This question was generally well answered and a majority of candidates scored marks. The need to break down a skill from the whole and improve the subroutines and then re-perform the whole was well understood. Examples varied in quality and accuracy for this A01 demand question. The example shown scores a full 2 marks and clearly demonstrates a higher level of understanding. This question was very well answered. Candidates had a good knowledge and understanding and were able to identify the difference between the two forms of feedback, and the examples seen were appropriate. Confusions were rare. This response scored the full 4 marks. The responses seen for question 4 reflected good teaching and candidate understanding. The answer shown in the slide was typical of those scoring the full mark. The description is clear and well structured, identifying the relationship between two stimuli and the delay in initiating actions to each. The example given is valid, that of a dummy move, and overall this is a very clear and concise answer and highlights the need to include a clear, explained example satisfying the A02 demand. This was the first of the 4 extended questions, and it produced a variety of responses. The mean mark was at level 2 at 4 to 6 marks. Many candidates scored at level 4 with understanding, and as an asterisk marked question, this requires wider component content. Higher marked answers referred to coaching styles and practice structures used to develop schema, but some lack the links to the wider course. Extended responses need to be balanced, and the implications and impacts can be both positive and negative. Schema theory was generally understood, reflecting the A02 and A03 demand. The example shown in slide 44 reflects the quality seen in level 4 responses. Please do take a moment to have a look through. This question was generally well understood. Candidates were able to link the frustration leading to aggression, but some failed to include the key caveat of goals being blocked, and this example did score full marks. This question produced a variety of responses, and some candidates failed to fully understand the requirement to detail the impact of external influences on a competitive performance. The candidate in this example includes sufficient detail to satisfy the command word requirement of summarize. They show how the identified external influences impact a performance to justify the mark given. All external influences normally have effects through social inhibition or social facilitation. Question 8 required both a knowledge of Steiner's theory and an applied example. This question saw many well-answered responses, but a few failed to detail a suitable example. In this example, 2 marks were gained, 1 for the correct theory and 1 for the example. The example of social loafing is correct. This and playing out a position are summarised well as the faulty processes. This question proved to be accessible to the vast majority of candidates. Understanding was demonstrated, and candidates often qualified their answers with an actual example. This example highlights how to write succinctly and still gain full marks, a point to remember when you're writing all of your answers. This points-based question requires accuracy of writing, requiring a definition, and thereby reflects the specification. Keywords examiners were looking for included born, innate, and trait theory, and the response shown is the full response with the inclusion of keywords and the additional qualification of these traits leading to a person being inclined to be a great leader. The last question in section A was very well answered, and candidates had a clear knowledge and understanding of arousal and anxiety and the link between the two, along with the associated effects. Details on methodologies to cope with arousal and anxiety could have been more extensive. This slide details a suitable introduction in terms of content and length, and there's a danger that introductions can become overly long and contain too much content that requires fuller exploration. This slide shows a candidate understands Hull's drive theory with qualification. They write succinctly given time constraints and the amount of content possible, and this highlights how candidates can include content to answer the question. One area that required fuller content was the second part of the question and the greater details of the methods used to improve performance. Question 12 highlighted the need to be accurate in writing a response, as some confusions existed here. Most candidates had some knowledge of the era, but failed to link physical activity to moral development. The answer shown scored full marks, identifying where the cult of athleticism originated, as in the public school era, and the meaning centered on physical activity and the moral dimension. Outline in question 13 requires non-linked points. This is an AO1 question. In this response, the candidates correctly outlined 2 points: how performers in elite sport are bought and sold as an item or commodity. They're also bound into sponsorship and endorsements, thereby becoming linked to the selling of goods and by association becoming commodified themselves. Then they lose their sports identity and become known for the product. Using the keywords in a question, in this case commodities, in an answer helps produce a more accurate and specific response. This question was well answered by some, but few candidates failed to detail 4 impacts worth 1 mark each. Correct content reflected available technology, increased analysis and understanding, or increased channels offering 24/7 coverage. Confusions also existed when answers weren't related to the viewing experience. Some candidates misread the question and gave answers such as travel implications or social demographics, and the example given did score full marks. This question saw the majority of candidates failing to gain the mark. The definitions contained in the specification, and therefore these questions require close accuracy. The example shown is worthy of the mark being awarded. Many candidates who failed to score had a vague knowledge of the term relating to some form of cash inducement, but it lacked the accuracy. Please do use the glossary. This 8-mark levels-based question proved a tricky one for what is an established A-level PE topic. Many candidates could only identify some form of comparative talent identification, and while these answers also lack the accuracy of detail allied to a depth of knowledge. The example shown highlights a good way to work through this type of question. Take the East German factor, then detail the corresponding influence on the UK. Specific detail was needed, such as the elite facilities of Bath and Loughborough and sports science, or the role of the EIS. This question covers the specification content 5.7.2, initiatives to promote participation. It was clear many candidates were unfamiliar with this. Some had an educated guess and gained 1 or even 2 marks. Centres are advised to regularly check websites and sign up for newsletters. This example did score 2 marks for wider involvement of all sections of the community, age and gender, and for promoting health. This extended question was well received by the candidates and produced many interesting answers. The structure of the answer should follow the question, keywords, namely sections on the effects on sport and then on society, with each section containing discrete paragraphs. This is a straightforward way to cover the areas and gain higher marks. Very few did this. The extract shown included content and discussion offering points of view, and this is vital for questions using the command word analyse based on AO2 and AO3 assessment objectives. As a question mark with an asterisk, it's important to include content from the wider component, such as the influences of political protest. The final extended question produced a mixed level of responses. The use of data this year was better than previously seen, and in many cases applied with insightful discussion. For some, though, data was simply copied into the answer with little or no contextualization. As the last question, time could have been at a premium. However, the conclusion seen on this slide is neat, concise, and summative. The 3 guiding words of opportunity, provision, and status were little used as section headings and then supported with discussions, support data, and evaluations. The question referred to global sport, and it was pleasing to see references to this through cultural diversity still negatively impacting women in sport. The next 4 slides in this section focus on extended answers, and it's really important that staff understand the taxonomy and how different command words require different strategies in the teaching of this specification. In answering extended answers, remember to keep focused on the context of the question. Ultimately, candidates should ask themselves, have I answered the specific question? AO2 can be serviced by applying the best sports, that support the points you're making. For example, on paper 1, action and reaction might have a great example from trampolining, so don't just use your own sport. Moment of inertia might have a great example from ice skating. Too many responses only focus on one sport. Analyse is a common theme in all extended levels criteria. Perhaps use the word so what when you consider your points. Can you say because, so that, therefore, and apply your knowledge? This slide details the link between the command word, command meaning, AOs, and marks. As assessment is levels-based, examiners are looking at the overall response and the three key determinants of knowledge, question understanding, and analysis, supported by applied examples. And this slide reinforces that some of the key requirements of the extended questions. Please do take a look at the suggested ideas and transfer of knowledge in the right-hand column. This slide offers some key tips for paper 1's future examinations. Please take a few moments to read through the slide content. And this slide offers some key tips for paper 2 future exams. Please take a few moments to read through this slide content. And lastly, this session will look at further support available on A-level PE. There are lots of opportunities for support from Pearson. Please do take the time to read the topic guides, examiners' reports, and the Inside Track magazine, as there are a lot of support and guidance available to centres in this material. And finally, please do look at the Pearson website for additional training opportunities should you require them.